Well, hello and welcome back, listeners, to the Arrowverse Crossover Crisis Podcast with me, your host, Ashley. And today, we will be reviewing Season 8, Episode 3 of The Flash Armageddon, Part 3. So this episode starts with Barry and Jefferson, aka Black Lightning, at the Hall of Justice. We learn that the Justice team that they've put together with Barry, Jefferson, Kara, Batwoman, Martian Manhunter, somebody else probably, Superman I think, that sort of Justice team has created some protocols, and Barry is invoking the Injustice Protocol, which means that he wants Jefferson to take away his powers by severing Barry's connection to the Speed Force. And so that's where we pick up on this episode. And kind of throughout this episode, Barry's acting a little erratic. He's definitely not calm at all. Jefferson keeps trying to calm him down. Jefferson wants to talk all of this through. He doesn't want to take away Barry's powers, but Barry is being very insistent and has this erratic behavior and acting really manic and is really pushing Jefferson to do this. So I really like having Black Lightning here. I think he brings a certain amount of, I don't want to say gravitas, but like a certain amount of like just, sort of wise man mentorship, kind of the role that Oliver Queen provided, just sort of that older, more experienced mentor that Barry kind of needs. And so I really like seeing him here interacting with Barry. We don't really get too much of them. We get a little bit in the beginning, then we get I think like one scene in the middle, and then that's pretty much it until the ending of the show. But it's great here, and I really like seeing him interact with Barry. And Barry is kind of slowly, like losing his mind. He's like, he's really buying into this, belief that Despero is right, and there's nothing he can do to change it, so he just wants to take away his powers to prevent it. So then we switch to Team Flash, who are operating out of Chester's grandmother's garage, and Cecile is really focused on wanting to find Barry, and then Iris comes in saying, oh, somebody's framing Barry, and that, oh, maybe Joe's not dead. And so we get a little bit more insight in this episode about what happened with Joe. They explain his death, that he fell on the train tracks and got hit by a train, and that there's, something sort of mysterious. Iris believes that it was all set up and that Joe wasn't supposed to die, or that he didn't actually die. And it's actually a really good scene for the actress who plays Cecile, because she gets to have, her character is always an empath, so she's always very kind of like emotional, but Cecile gets a really good emotional breakdown over the grief of Joe's death, and she kind of attacks Iris a little bit, but I think it feels like a real moment. It feels like something that people go through when they lose a loved one. And it's a really good scene. I really think the actress is doing a great job in that moment. But I also like that Iris kind of still has hope that Joe might be alive, because that's kind of always been a theme of the Flash, is you always have to have hope, right? And that Iris is, has that hope and doesn't want to give up. But again, you have the sort of realism that Cecile has. And so you kind of have two different sort of reactions to the same thing. That it kind of just makes it feel a little bit more real, because normally what the show does is oh, we have to have hope, and then, oh, everybody gets on board and they all have hope. Yay, everything's going to be okay. But I really like this, that Cecile is like, no, it's not okay. It's been terrible. I've been trying to hold it all in, and this is too much for me, and Joe's never coming back, and we all just have to deal with that. It is a real moment, and I really do appreciate that. And then, of course, Chester makes a sort of X-Men reference about Cerebro, because Cecile wants him to build a device that will amplify her powers. In order to do so, they need another person that has psychic abilities, and so Cecile goes and teams up with Top, who I believe we saw in, not last season, but in season 6, I believe Cecile went to go see her. So anyway, she brings in the Top character, who also has psychic powers, and I like that they kind of define which type of psychic powers they have, but ultimately it's still psychic energy. And so Chester builds a device that can kind of amplify their powers so that they can try to locate Barry. The whole goal is that Cecile just wants to find Barry. Iris wants to uncover what happened with Joe, so she and Allegra go off on a side mission, sort of the C plot of the episode. They end up at the train station, and they notice that the camera footage was altered somehow. Now this is interesting. Iris, we know that she has some sort of time sickness from whatever happened in last season. None of it makes sense. But that she can see things, like it makes her see certain elements of time, which is really interesting. So she kind of sees these weird energy on the train tracks, and then later she sees it, I think, on like the files that Allegra gives her. And so we learn that she's been taking treatments with Dion, aka the Still Force that we met from last season. He was sort of the better of the forces that we had last season. I didn't like the Strength Force and the Sage Force or whatever. He was actually one of the better characters that had some actual character development and personality. So it's interesting that they decided to bring him back here. So she's been getting treatments with Dion to, I think, remove some sort of remnants of the Time Force or whatever within her that has been making her kind of sick. But she asks him to undo all of the treatments so that she can see what is going on. Dion says, he couldn't see it, but then he can see it. But it's the negative Still Force is what he says. And so they see that the train station is just filled with negative Still Force, or at the time, energy, and that it's actually, I think he said it's like decaying in reverse or something. So that's why he couldn't see it. He couldn't sense that somebody was manipulating with the timeline because it's from the negative Still Force, which I find kind of to be interesting that they're kind of going. I mean, it makes sense if there's a negative Speed Force, there'd be a negative version of all the forces. So Iris and Dion sort of uncover that somebody has been messing with the timeline, which would, I think, sort of make sense as to why maybe Barry didn't know Joe had died. Maybe it wasn't because he forgot. It's because he has the memories of a timeline from when Joe didn't die, because somebody's messing with the time. So it's kind of an interesting thing that happens, and they end up showing up at the end with Barry and Jefferson to kind of help Barry out at the end against Despero. But anyway, back to Cecile. So Cecile goes and teams up with Top. They use this Cerebro mechanism to try to find Barry. The first time, it kind of doesn't go the right way. We haven't seen the Top since season 6. The character, I guess, was always kind of maybe over the top and campy. And she's a little kind of like, she's definitely a villain. Like, just because she's helping Cecile out doesn't mean that she isn't still, like, a bad person. So she, like, gives Cecile, like, a pep talk. Well, not really a pep talk, but she, like, yells at Cecile to, like, stop, put your emotions aside, stop grieving for Joe, and, find Barry. And it works. It does. But then later on, Caitlin gives Cecile a bit of an actual pep talk and says that she shouldn't just hide her grief away. And we find out that because of Cecile's powers, she is literally burdened by the grief of Joe's death from everyone. She could feel everybody's grief. And that's really weighing on her. And that's something that will come back later in the episode. So they end up finding where Barry is. He's obviously at the Hall of Justice. I don't know why they wouldn't think of that off the top of the head to just look there to begin with. Also, there's a weird thing going on where the Cerebro headpiece is like hooked up to an antenna TV. I'm not sure that's how maybe that is how psychic waves work. That's how TV waves work, I guess. But it's kind of weird that it like pops up like a perfect image of Barry. Where's this image coming from? Like, she can hear Barry's voice, but that doesn't like provide a sense of location and scenery for where Barry is. It just, that kind of, I don't know, the TV thing really bothered me, and even Top was like, is that a TV with rabbit ears? Like, what is that? I did like the joke that Chester made that that's his grandma's TV and she needs it back by 7 o'clock. That was kind of funny. So they end up finding where Barry is. So Barry has been building a device to amplify Jefferson's powers so that he can take away Barry's connection to the Speed Force. So the theme of this episode is kind of like amplifying your powers. Like the theme of the first episode was leveling up, and this theme is we got to amplify our powers, right? And so there's a good moment between Jefferson and Barry where Jefferson confesses that, he lost his friend. I believe his sidekick cop friend from the Black Lightning show, which, again, I didn't really watch, so I don't know if it was addressed on the show in the last season that his friend had died, or if this is new information. I don't know. But it's a good moment between Jefferson, and he talks about, how Joe wouldn't want Barry to give up and everything. I really like that Black Lightning's here to kind of, again, be that kind of mentoring, sort of level-headed reasoning figure. He's kind of serving as the Joe role, he's kind of serving as the Oliver role, and I think it just really works well with Barry. So Barry finishes the device, and Jefferson basically tries to throw all of his lightning at Barry to remove the connection, but it doesn't work. In the meantime, Despero has been just kind of chilling in Star Labs, watching everybody with his third eye, and then he decides to turn on the particle accelerator, and we find out the government people from last episode are still at Star Labs doing whatever they're doing. And then he turns on the particle accelerator, and then I think he absorbs its energy, maybe, for more power. It's not really clear what he's doing there. But again, this theme is all about amplifying the powers. So I think that's what Despero was also trying to do, was amplify his powers as well. So Despero then goes to Cecile and Team Flash, and Top immediately turns on them and wants to team up with Despero because, again, she's a villain. But Despero reads her mind and then tosses her aside, and we think she's dead for a few minutes until Caitlin is like, she's alive, but barely. But then Despero tries to get into Cecile's mind, and he succeeds in finding where Barry is, but she is able to repel him from her using all that grief from Joe's death, and sort of overwhelms Despero into just giving up, I think, which was kind of interesting. Also, Cecile's eyes do this rainbow color swirl thingy when she uses her powers. I don't remember that when that started, but it's kind of cool, but it also reminds me of Allegra's rainbow powers, so I'm not sure if there's any connection there or what, or why her eyes have to swirl rainbow colors. I don't know. Top's eyes turn green when she uses her powers, so I guess if you're using powers, your eyes are just got to turn different colors, maybe. So Despero knows where Barry is, and he eventually goes to meet up with them at the Hall of Justice. In the meantime, Jefferson doesn't want to help Barry finish losing his powers. Barry ends up losing his temper with Jefferson, and I like that Jefferson is being more level-headed and wants to be the reason of truth here, because Barry didn't tell Jefferson about Despero or any of that stuff or the future, and Jefferson feels like that's important details that he should know before he just takes away somebody's powers. So they Jefferson doesn't fight, but Barry kind of fights Jefferson, and again I like that Black Lightning isn't really fighting back, but he gets to use his powers here, and they're actually really cool. So Black Lightning can kind of use his lightning powers to sort of hover or redirect orientate his body, kind of like Iron Man does. And then also he can use like a lightning rope, which is really cool. And he can redirect Barry's lightning back at Barry. And he says, I don't need your lightning, have it back. So he has a cool split of powers in this episode. It's all at the end of the episode, but it's really cool. Again, don't watch the Black Lightning show, so I'm not 100% sure what he can and can't do with his powers, so it's really good to see it here. I had no idea he could hover, create lightning rope. That's all pretty cool. So they fight for a little bit, and then Barry kind of goes crazy and bounces them around the warehouse like a pinball until they just fall over, and Jefferson gives a little bit of a speech to Barry, and he calls back to when Oliver Queen had to bargain with the Monitor to save Barry's life. That was all the way back in Elseworlds, but it didn't actually happen until Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so he says to Barry, is this what Oliver was trading his life for? I think he uses that same quote as, Barry is the best of us. So Barry just needs to believe in himself. And it's kind of, that kind of memory of Oliver is kind of enough to kind of like snap Barry out of his madness a little bit. And he apologizes to Jefferson, but they're interrupted by Despero. So Despero comes in, and I like that Black Lightning throws a light right at Despero's third eye, which I think is the source of his flame of Pytar power. So it kind of really damages them temporarily. And then Dion and Iris come in. Dion gives Barry some Steel Force energy so that Barry can travel to the future, because Iris is like, you've been set up and we need to figure this all out. So Barry ends up traveling to the future while Black Lightning tries to take care of Despero, and eventually Despero just disappears and leaves. Obviously, he's upset that nobody wants to help him kill Barry, which is obviously nobody wants to do that. Despero, what show are you on? But anyway, so Barry ends up traveling to future 2031, and the end scene, the big reveal, is we have Harrison Wells, aka most likely the Reverse Flash version of Harrison Wells. He's giving this sort of like gala event party, and he is apparently with Iris somehow, and it's clearly an alternate reality timeline where Reverse Flash ends up with Iris. And then some of the party guests include Ryan Wilder, aka Batwoman, Alex Danvers from Supergirl, Ryan Choi, who we met in Crisis on Infinite Earths, who we thinking is going to become the next The Atom character. And then a couple of other guests, Cecile and some random people are there too, as he's giving this kind of speech. And then they all turn to Barry as he enters in, and they're like, what the heck is he doing here? And that's the cliffhanger. So next week, hopefully, we'll get a conclusion to this. I wasn't expecting this is how they would include Batwoman and Alex Danvers and Ryan Choi. I was going to assume that they would be on the hero's side. But because they are in the future, maybe that's how they include Mia Queen, Oliver's daughter, as the Arrow. So maybe that's how they include her. Or maybe Barry goes back to the normal timeline and recruits them to prevent them from going bad. It's all getting really, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. They're just really messing with the timeline. This whole mystery of who is messing with the timeline. It's probably Reverse Flash. But could it be the villain that continues after Armageddon into the rest of Season 8 is a good question. We don't know yet. One of the things that I sort of criticized this Armageddon up to the end of Part 3 here is we've not seen enough of this Armageddon destruction. We haven't seen Barry being the one to cause the Armageddon. We haven't seen any of the real sort of fallout and aftermath. And so it kind of seems like we're sort of jumping the gun on Barry just needs to lose his powers to prevent this from happening. Why? We don't know. Just because Despero says this happens is that's all we're basing this on. We're not seeing Barry actually do these bad things to justify, we need to take away his powers. To me, it just is, it's not enough. Barry's not enough of a danger to do that. It just really feels like, he's kind of losing his mind a little bit and maybe not fully in control. Okay, lock him up in the containment thingy at Star Labs, or something, or put medicuffs on him. To take away his powers is, like Jefferson says, this is a one-way ticket. You take away your powers, you're not getting those back. Which, we obviously know Flash can get his powers back. He's done it several times. But it just feels like they haven't really built up this Armageddon event to be as destructive and dangerous and serious enough that we need to just take away Barry's powers, which I think it goes part into that's also why Barry is kind of losing his mind a little bit, is because he thinks the immediate answer is to take away his powers. He doesn't see that, there's other solutions yet. But I think we need to, I wish we would have gotten more of the actual Armageddon event. And instead, this is all about preventing the Armageddon, which, I mean, is still a good story, but in order for it to make a real impact of, oh, is Barry going to lose his powers or not, we really need to see the full Armageddon play out to sort of take it really seriously. Like, this is something that is serious and needs to be stopped. Right now, it doesn't really feel like it's serious and needs to be stopped. It just feels like something Despero's telling people. So that's sort of my one criticism so far of the Armageddon crossover event. So we'll see what they do going forward. We still have 2 more episodes left. Again, I hope Batwoman, Alex Danvers, Ryan Choi are not like against Barry. I hope they end up being heroes. So we don't know. And then who's been, using negative Still Force? Is it Reverse Flash? Can he even tap into, the Still Force? We don't know. So there's a lot of mysteries, a lot of things left on the table still here, a lot of things we still need to wrap up. Again, Joe's death and the Armageddon crisis. I hope we get to see Black Lightning again. I'm not sure. This might have been his only true episode. I know he popped up at the end of the last episode. This might be his only true episode. I think they used him really great here. Again, I love his sort of mentorship over Barry, sort of being the voice of reasoning, and then again seeing his powers that he has at the end was really awesome. I know his show got canceled, so I would like for them to use Black Lightning more as a character in these other DC shows that are still going on. Because he's just such a cool character, and he just has such a different dynamic with the heroes, and I think he's really awesome, so I want to see him come back. But hopefully we'll get some other crossover hero characters, Batwoman, Alex, Ryan Choi, Mia Queen. We still have them coming. We have 2 episodes left. So that's all I have for this episode. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next crisis.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. And if you want to talk more DC or Marvel television shows, be sure to follow me on Twitter at Crashly87. That's CRASHLIE 87. For all you book lovers out there, be sure to check out my blog, Fantastic Literature Review, all about book reviews and short story reviews. Link in the description below. And if you like the podcast, be sure to leave a comment and share it with your friends. Thank you.